Welcome to Within the Four Walls, Queer Lockdown Stories, a collaborative project between New Writing South, the Centre for the Study of Sexual Dissidence at the University of Sussex, and English Literature and Creative Writing at the University of Brighton. I'm Tanaka Mhishi. I'm very excited for this conversation, even if we have had a slight warning of full of technical difficulties. I haven't met both of you before, so I think rather than me introducing you, which would be slightly artificial, I'll ask you to introduce yourself. So maybe Jane, if you could go first.
And what would you like me to talk about? What sort of writing I do?
Yes, and how you're doing on this fine September day.
I'm Jane Traies, and it's just lovely to be with you both. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I was a little bit apprehensive when I was invited to take part in this, because I suppose I would now call myself a writer, though that's only happened quite recently in my life. And I don't still really think of myself as being up there with the creative writers, because why don't I think that? Because most of the work I do, I would say that I think of my writing as a tool for getting things done. So, for instance, I'm an oral historian. I go around interviewing people about their life stories, particularly marginalised people, particularly lesbians. And then I help to shape and frame and publish those stories so that voices that otherwise wouldn't be heard get heard. So my writing doesn't fit the sort of stereotype of the writer in another way, which is that a lot of it is actually collaborative rather than sitting all by myself at my computer being inspired. So that's the kind of writer I am. And in some ways, I've been able to do more of that during lockdown because there hasn't been a lot of demands to do other things. But in other ways, because I tend to work collaboratively, it's been a huge challenge. So will that be enough to start us off, do you think?
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, and there's definitely, I feel like there's going to be a lot of stuff that we have to talk about, because I don't quite do the same kind of work, but I sit in an interesting area. Daniel, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us how you're doing?
Yeah, hello. So hi, I'm Daniel Spelman. He, him, his, and I'm a mature student at the University of Brighton. I'm going into my third year, studying English literature and creative writing. So I think that's where my writing has kind of begun. I worked with horses for a long period, but jobs in my mind would kind of wander into like different stories that I might write, and this going to university has been like an avenue for that. In my writing, I tend to focus on LGBTQ stories, and I'm particularly interested in like who has the right to write these stories and why we tell the stories that we do. So one of the best modules for me at university, we did queer writing, and a lot of the criticism of most of the pieces is that they follow a stereotype of you know, you kill your gays basically, and it's, you know, that everything ends in tragedy. But you have to tell the responsibility of the arts basically. So whether it's that you have to offer escapism and this idealistic of this is what you could be, or whether you need to show where we've been in the history, and also like if you look at the global landscape actually, that, you know, the things that people are still going through all over the world. So yeah, I find that really interesting. So that's something I focus on as a writer, I think, is trying to tell those stories in a way that finds a balance, if that makes sense.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's so relevant right now, not just because the pandemic is kind of exacerbating all of these pre-existing inequalities and divisions, but also because it's sort of much the same talking to someone in Morocco as it is talking to someone across the city when you're in lockdown, right? So in some ways, we're more connected to people in different times, in different places anyway. And I suppose I should introduce myself as well. So my name's Tanaka Mhishi. I always struggle to talk about what I do because I do so many different things and it's changing so quickly in the pandemic. But primarily, I'm a playwright and a poet, and I do a lot of work with marginalized stories. So historically, that's been stories of survivors of sexual violence, but I also do a lot of work with communities. So at the moment, I'm working with a community of young people from migrant and refugee backgrounds. I've done bits of work with the trans community. I've done, I kind of have a sort of sub-focus on bisexual stories, and kind of the intersections between all of those things are quite interesting to me as well. And I work, Jane, I sort of sit between Jane, what you do, and kind of more traditional creative writing, and that a lot of what I do involves going into communities, doing lots of research, having lots of conversations, and then my writing sort of builds itself out of that. So I'm definitely not sitting at the computer just being inspired either, and that's a hierarchy I reckon we could smash.
I'm really interested to hear what you said, because the book I'm currently working on is a collection of life stories of lesbian asylum seekers. So we've got some interesting crossover there.
Yeah, definitely. That's maybe we'll have to do the have to shoot a few emails back and forth and kind of see.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. But the other thing I think we've started to talk about is when Daniel said that he'd studied English literature and creative writing, I was really interested, because when I was young, I did a degree in English literature, and nobody ever suggested that the people who studied the English literature could possibly ever produce any themselves. The study of English literature was the study of great white men who had been inspired in some magical way, and if it did anything, it stopped you from ever considering being a creative writer. And I think it probably took me 50 years to get over it. So I'm absolutely thrilled to hear that Daniel's doing something more encouraging.
And
that's really
Daniel,
interesting, though. I think I can only speak for Brighton. Oh,
no,
sorry.
I
was just going to say I can only speak for Brighton, but. Oh. I can only speak for Brighton, but they have a panel currently called Decolonizing the Curriculum, and they're trying to bring in more like LGBTQ stories and stories from people of colour, and trying to diversify it, because it does, I think even now you still have, overwhelmingly, it's very heteronormative cis white men, and we always harken back to the classics, which are always written from a certain perspective. So, and I think having that dual, for me, the reason I picked joint honours is you have the dual of, you study different forms of art and different works, and you can take from that, and it can have a stronger influence on your own writing. But yeah, I still think that's still apparent today, that they're trying to shift the focus from purely just one dominant voice.
I was curious to ask you both about the past couple of months, which for those, I guess people are going to be watching this in the future, potentially like relatively far into the future, when COVID-19 is just a thing in a book somewhere. So I wonder for both of you, what's been going on the past few months for you in your lives, in your writing lives, in your lives as human beings walking this earth? anyone can start. You have to name people over Zoom, don't you? That's how that works.
Oh.
Daniel, would you like to go first this time?
Yeah. So for me, the start of lockdown was quite traumatic or dramatic thing, because I moved back home to my parents, which I'm very lucky to be able to do, but also at 28 is a bit of a weird feeling. Yeah, and I've started working, and so I'm working a lot more hours and stuff like that. But really beneficial for me. I've been able to sort my finances, because deciding to go and be a student in the middle of my 20s had an effect on those. And as for my writing, I think actually definitely in the early part of it, it was quite definitely in the early part of it was quite useful for my writing, because I do tend to lean slightly more towards like quite sad, tragic stories, and so the fact that the world was like wildly depressing was quite helpful for inspiration. But I'd say that in itself has brought up some things for me in terms of, again, my main interest is, I think there's still definitely in queer narratives, there's a big argument over what stories we tell, and, falling into tropes of just telling very depressing stories. But I feel like, especially at times like this, I feel like sometimes our history gets erased. So just in recent like news, you've got like they've done like a pride train, and Piers Morgan was writing about how ridiculous it is that there's a gay train, and he's like, as a staunch advocate for gay rights, and I'm like, if you look at like in 1989 he called it EastBenders when they aired their first gay kiss, and he wrote all these, and I know you have to allow people room to change, but it's the same as like we have a Tory government with a prime minister who called people tank-topped bum boys, and if you look at like articles that are being published, Priti Patel is like changing, like legalizing poppers, and then if you look at the comments underneath it, people are like, an ally and we stand and all the rest of it, and as you look back on people's like her voting history. So I think definitely, I think personally for me, I worry with something like COVID is not that it shouldn't be a distraction. Obviously, it is the most pressing thing in the world at the moment, really. It's a global pandemic, and that, it's called that for a reason. But I think that often, I think when there is a big focal point, definitely other things go by the wayside, or can be rewritten, or erased, or forgotten about. And I think sometimes that can steal a bit of focus, and things can, it's easy to rewrite history, basically, during that time. Sorry, that went on a bit of a tangent.
No, it's a good tangent. I'm definitely very aware of something that's really present in my mind at the moment is the amount of caring that is necessary in this time, and caring for people. And we kind of know that kind of in LGBT communities and queer communities, like there's a lot of mutual aid, and there's lots of people with kind of found families and who have had to build their structures of care from the ground up. I was thinking of myself, when I was 18, I had to leave home kind of really quite suddenly, and quite like I had a fight with my father. I had to pack a bag that day and leave, and that was in March, so about the same time that the pandemic started. And I'm just thinking there will be young people who are in that position in the middle of a pandemic, inevitably, who haven't had the chance to build structures where they're going to be cared for, because a lot of us go through a period where there isn't anyone. And I know that at the time that I was essentially homeless, there wasn't any kind of government support at that period as well, right? Because I just turned 18, so I was also in full-time education. So I was essentially told, if you want any benefits, you have to quit school. You don't get to go to university. you can go on job seekers, but there's no way for you to stay in education and have housing. And so, yeah, I guess that's something that I'm really, it's one of those things that we know must exist, but we're not seeing, we're not seeing it even in the way people tell stories about the LGBT community right now, because those voices maybe haven't found us yet. But Jane, how has lockdown been for you? What's been going on? What's the terrain there?
That's quite interesting what you said about care, because that taps into the project I've been doing during lockdown. I'm doing an oral history project. I started it in January with a group called the Lesbian Immigration Support Group, and they work in Manchester. And among the LGBTQ asylum seeker support groups in the UK, they are unique in the sense that they are the only all-women one. So the people that they're helping are mainly people that are, well, they're women who are claiming asylum in the UK on the grounds of their sexual orientation, and have been refused usually, and therefore need support. So they're sort of triply disadvantaged before they start, because they're asylum seekers, they're women of colour, and they're lesbians. So that's four things, isn't it? And so it's been, I won't go into the long story of how I got involved with them, but it's been a huge learning experience for me. And so I decided that one of the things we might do was do this oral history project. We're going to make a book of life stories. And, oh, hello.
Hi, I'm so sorry I'm so late, but hi.
Hello.
This is it. That's okay. So Subira has joined us. Jane, what I'll do is I'll ask you to finish the little piece you were telling us, and then maybe Subira, we can get you to introduce yourself.
Sure.
So
Jane, sorry, go ahead.
That's fine. So I started doing the interviews, and I completed almost all of them just as lockdown happened. So there were a few that didn't get done, but I had enough people to work with and enough stories to make a book. But because of lockdown, I was unable to go to Manchester anymore. I'm 75, I'm asthmatic, and I have not come out of lockdown yet, and I shan't be coming out until there's a vaccine. So everything's had to be done digitally. And this has been really challenging, because part of the oral history experience is the relationship that you build, obviously, between you, and the trust that you have. And I only had 5 minutes to establish that, because ever afterwards it's been a matter of, well, mainly WhatsApp, because most of the women I'm working with don't have computers. They have phones, but they don't have money to put on the phones, because, as you probably know, the asylum seeker support rate, which the government gives them, is under £40 a week. So under £6 a day to live on. So mainly it's WhatsApp, because that's free. And one of the things that's happened is that they have, as a group, the support group, the volunteers and the members, the asylum seekers, the refugees together, have a WhatsApp group for themselves. And I was allowed to join it. And that has been the most extraordinary experience, because the love and support which these women have been able to give each other has been entirely through that WhatsApp group. They've all been housed in various outer suburbs of Manchester. They can't come into the city centre because that costs so much on the bus, and anyway it's full of germs. So they're all extremely isolated at the moment, and a lot of them, for reasons that you will understand, are already suffering with huge mental health issues. And yet every morning my phone pings, and it's somebody saying, "Good morning, my family. Good morning, my lovely ladies. How are you today? May God bless you." And it's been really strong. And then, of course, in the middle of it all, there was George Floyd. And I thought again about the fact that I'm actually working with a bunch of people of colour for whom that was huge. And the WhatsApp group became a source of support in a new way. So that a lot of videos were posted of mainly black women and other women of colour. They were the kind of videos that said, "You're worth it. You're beautiful. And this was what the women were offering to each other. They were saying, hang in there, we are worth something." So it's been a very moving experience. And of course, what it's also meant is that during the course of our doing this project, Black Lives Matter has become so much more important. And it's made the project more urgent, really. I think we really need to get these stories out there. Though it's also raised all sorts of ethical issues about, you know, what the hell you're doing if you're a white researcher working with you know, people of colour and where you stand ethically and all that. So it's been really interesting. Sorry, I've rambled, but that was about care, really. It was about how you care for people in lockdown when you've only got your phone. It's been a real learning experience. They're a lovely, lovely group of people.
There has been something that sparked off there for me, and I've noticed in myself, I'm listening to all of the music that I listened to when I was a teenager, and I couldn't figure out why.
Oh, that's so interesting.
But I suddenly realized it's because when I was growing up, I don't even have to tell people how old I am now, we got our first computer, or I got my first computer at about the age of 12 or 13. So that would have been 2004 or 2005, thereabouts. And so, of course, the first 6 years of me being able to engage with other LGBTQ people was online. And that was kind of my primary source of information and of community. And so for me, this is sort of like going back to that very online existence that is actually quite familiar and quite, I know how to do it. You know what I mean? It's not pleasant. It's not comfortable. It's far less than ideal, but there is something about that waiting for it to be over, waiting to be free, waiting to be out of this locked down, turned in situation that is extremely familiar to me. I think there's some comfort in knowing that I've sort of done a lockdown in that my life was a lockdown at one point. And I got through it. I'm not sure how much this is going to be edited, but Subira, could you maybe introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how things have been going for you for the past months, whether how the personal or in terms of your work you're comfortable sharing.
Hi, I'm Subira. My pronouns are they, them, and theirs. I'm a non-binary spoken words performer, which has been created a bizarre thing of like the things that I typically do are so based around having people in front of me, like a large group of people, and what really is my work without an audience. It's been raising all those questions. That's been like a baffling, bizarre thing on its own. So my lockdown has been like quite strange insofar as like as soon as I knew it was happening, as soon as we got that announcement, I knew I had to go home to be with my mother. And so my lockdown has actually not been like, I went from Brighton back to my hometown. And so I was like really relating to the stuff you were saying about kind of teenage regression in a sense, or like this going back. I think I've been doing that as well. I went back to my teenage home. So it's all been really interesting in that sense. I like also before lockdown was working in a pub, in the Marlborough pub, and I've just been so used to being around lots of people every day and being quite sociable and being isolated was just a very strange kind of stillness that I've not been present with for a while. But yeah, this stillness has been like hard, and then it's been good, and then it's been all of the things. And I think probably everyone has done like all kinds of journeys with the lockdown of like, everything's great and I'm gonna bake banana bread, and then oh my god, like what is everything, and do I even have friends? Do they even exist? Did I imagine them all? And like what is community? What does it mean anymore? And it's cool, I've learned how to draw now, like you know. It's been hugely up and down for me. I can probably say more on that, but I don't know if you want me to kind of keep rambling or.
No, that was gorgeous. I have to confess I had a brief technical issue, so I missed a chunk of what you said in the middle.
No.
But that's fine. I think that was me, so the recording got it. I wanted to ask, Jane, I know you said you haven't been going out, and I've had to be extremely careful as well because my father is just not very well, and so I need to be able to go and help out if something happens. But public space, how is that? Is that different for us? Is it the same? Is it what's going on there? Does anyone have any thoughts about that? Does anyone want to jump in?
I'll jump in to say that that's been the biggest contrast for me between this year and last year, because over the last few years I have been at home very little. I travel about both collecting life stories, but also I do a lot of public speaking. This time last year I was in Italy, and before that I was in Canada. In February, I'm never at home because I travel up and down the country in History Month, talking about lesbian history, basically. And so this year, I was quite tired by the time January came, and I said to myself, 2020 will be the year when I don't travel as much. But I had no idea that it would be, I didn't hardly travel outside my front door. And it's been a bit more of a contrast than I actually intended. But it's been, it's fine. I think there was a point at which I felt you mustn't let yourself get to a mental state where you're actually frightened to go out. That would be very bad. And I know a lot of people that's happened to. So you've got to just be a bit sensible about it and go to the shops from time to time and walk. And of course I garden and I have an allotment, so it's not that I don't actually go out of the house. But yes, I think that's been a huge change for me. And so not actually physically seeing people because I live on my own, very much. That's huge. It's huge. And it really, I think it's very easy to say in practical terms what's been taken away from us or what we've gained, whatever. But I think we won't know for quite a long time what this has done to us.
Yeah, that is the thing, isn't it? Is that this is such a massive year, and the ripples are going to be huge. But there's something funny about being stuck in these momentous events when actually your world has shrunk, and you know that's quite bizarre as a sensation as well. Subira, how is it? How have you been kind of inhabiting public spaces? What's changed?
I've been barely inhabiting public spaces for similar reasons. Yeah, my halfway through, my mum is kind of 70, and so kind of needs to be extra careful anyways, but partway through lockdown she got really ill and she's just had to have a surgery, so she was kind of extra, like, you know, we were really having to be super careful, because it was kind of the thing of like, if she gets called in for surgery and she has COVID, they will not give her the surgery that she desperately needs. Yeah. So, you know, on top of course, we don't want to get COVID because we don't want to get COVID. Like, it's been that. So kind of everything has been like so much more fraught and fearful. And like, Jane, I'm resonating with what you said. Like, I've been trying my best to not get scared of going outside, but it's terrifying, and I'm angry, and I go outside and I see people walking around without masks hanging out in groups, and I'm angry. I just think, how dare you? Like what? I go out to get shopping. I sometimes go out for like walks and stuff, but I'm finding myself so tense and so angry every time I go out. And it's interesting the way that I feel, the confidence I feel in myself and the space I feel I can take up. I've taken a lot of time to build myself to be the kind of person who feels confident. I used to be incredibly shy. Like, I've been queer and Black. I've been told I shouldn't exist. So I've been spending so much time building myself to be able to stand up for myself and confidently take up space. And now the way I feel I can be in public space has changed so much. I don't feel I can defend myself in the same way. Like, I've experienced street harassment, and I experienced street harassment and I didn't feel like I caught myself. Usually I can shout back and, put somebody in their place and shame them or whatever. I do something that makes me feel empowered in response. And I had to catch myself in this moment where this guy was getting angry with me and I was getting angry with him, and I started shouting back, and then he started walking towards me, and I was like, oh, there is that violence in closeness now, because he doesn't have to respect my space. And actually the only safe thing to do, not just for me, but for everybody else around me, especially for my mother, is to walk away or run away. And that doesn't feel good for me.
I think you need to ring me up every day.
Yeah.
And then I will tell you that you are strong and you are beautiful. Because this is very bad, what you're telling us. I don't like this. And you are clearly not that person.
Yeah, it's definitely like having to think about or like reframe things in my head to allow myself to still understand myself as a strong person, as an empowered person. But yeah. It feels so different now, the way I can interact with people and space. It's a lot to think about.
Okay. Oh God, yeah. I relate so much to that in a slightly different way. I kind of, my defense in public space has always been to look extremely respectable. Like that's been my way of doing it, being a nice, properly brought up young man, keeping the queer down, but also not so far down that I look vulnerable, because like I grew up in an area which was relatively heavily policed. And so kind of the thing I was always navigating was, be the boy in the class who gets by the police the least, or be the Black boy in the class. And then I went into a very white secondary school, and accent changed and all of that sort of stuff. But I was walking down our local high street recently, and there were two police officers walking the other way. And I suddenly realized that my usual tactic of making my face very bright and happy and non-threatening doesn't work behind a mask. You can't navigate public space and do all of those things, do all those little keeping safe, being, managing these little micro interactions with the primary tool hidden away. And I remember everyone talking about running, and actually my neighbors own a running magazine. And so I've had a couple of discussions with them where they've been like, you should go running. And I kind of go, oh, I don't fancy that. It just doesn't feel, it feels too, like, me running down the street wearing a mask in a time when Black Lives Matter is everywhere in the news feels like the dumbest thing I could do, you know.
But automatically threatening.
And I guess that, yeah, like, and I have very little tools to be able to manage that in the same way that I maybe would have done before the pandemic. Daniel, what about for you? Because you've moved home as well.
Yeah. So in terms of public space, I suppose for me, I'm quite lucky in the sense that so I've worked a lot through lockdown. I work with horses, so it's me and one other person, and I'm out, and it's very physical, and that's been great for my mental health. Because when I first moved back and I didn't have a job and uni had fallen all over the shop, and I was suddenly back in my teenage bedroom, and I'm very lucky that I have a wonderful supportive family, but it still felt like my life had just imploded. So I've been very lucky that I've been able to scramble out of that, and now I'm out most days, and it's, you know, and in the safest way possible. But yeah, you still have that anxiety. And I think as well for me, I mean, I navigate the world with quite a lot of privilege as a white cisgendered man, but I'm quite openly, outwardly gay man. I don't have a lot of passing privilege in terms of like heteronormative behavior. I think, you know, it's no, you know, Stevie Wonder can figure out that I'm gay. And so I think for me, moving back from Brighton to I'm in Essex, like a little seaside town, and it's a conservative town, and you know, most of the boys that I went to school with wear Fred Perry t-shirts and bootcut jeans, and go to Nando's at the weekend, and I don't dress like that, and it's taken me, there's a lot of ownership in that. So just in the choice of clothing I wear, I tend to wear quite loud, bright things because which in itself comes from a place of privilege, because I still have, you know, the ability to do that, but I present myself in a way that I feel like even if I internally want to like shrink away, I present myself in quite a loud, like vibrant way, so that like it's kind of an ownership thing of, you know, this is here I am, this is me, I take up this space, and it kind of forces me to stay quite authentic. But I do acknowledge that comes from a lot of privilege. But yeah, so moving back, I feel like I can navigate, like you can walk around Brighton and I'm like the archetype for Brighton, really, like very, you know, big, you know, it's lots of white flamboyant gay people, really, because Brighton is like, when you speak to people from where I'm from, they say, oh, it must be so diverse, and I don't think that's true. I think Brighton has a very niche diversity, but I fit that. So moving back home has been weird in that sense, because I wear things and then I notice people, you know, people stare at me and people look at me, or people talk about you, you know, because in fairness, I have a pair of like sequin glitter Doc Marten boots, and I go to Tesco in them, and it's like, well, you're probably like attracting attention, but you know, that doesn't get a second look in Brighton. So I think that's a thing, is, you know, and as I say, and I come from a lot of privilege, so I think if you look at in terms of, you know, my whiteness and being male and such, so I think, you know, I won't be the only person that has had to relocate and has had to move back into family homes, etc. I'm very lucky that, you know, my mum is a single parent, but my mum, my sister's a lesbian, my mum is very accepting, my stepdad's great. My dad is wildly homophobic and we don't have a relationship anymore, but I'm very lucky that where I have came back to is a safe space, whereas, you know, and I'm a mature student as well, so I think of, you know, younger students who do not have any like financial backing, for example. There's just one example. If you're trans, you know, are you detransitioning, or how are you coping in that situation? If you move to university and you're openly gay, and then you come back and you're back in the closet, you know, it is that regression. I think it affects so many people actually as well. I am rambling a little now, but I have a friend who works in LGBTQ mental health, and he was talking about the elderly in care homes, and they work a lot with trans people who have detransitioned because they've ended up in care homes, and they want to feel safer. And it's the same with you know, with gay people, and they don't present themselves in that way anymore because they've lost that kind of autonomy over their choices. And I think I think that is happening to a wider demographic now because of lockdown. Yeah, that was a bit of a tangent, but yeah, I do think my experience is a very minor version of that, but I think it can be amplified depending on your age, your background, etc.
And I guess the maybe the part of the learning there from what you're saying is that actually post-pandemic, we need to make sure that those voices are not left behind. Because I think there are definitely people in our community who we leave behind and ignore sometimes, because they're not shiny and photo ready and, you know, going to go on the telly and make everyone feel good about buying a rainbow pin.
Yeah, exactly. And
like the idea of having to detransition or to go back in the closet because you need support, you know, with physical care is actually pretty horrific, and we all hope we're going to get old. It's certainly better than the alternative. It seems insane and actually quite self-destructive that as a community we weren't outraged that was happening before any of this came up.
Well, some of us were, dear. Some of us have been banging on about it for quite a long time, but I'm afraid it's not really changed. And yes, the whole care home thing is something we could do an entire podcast about. I think there's a lot to be done there. I've just this week taken a lesbian friend to a care home for the first time, and it's raised all these issues very, very much in my mind. And of course, COVID makes it worse because they won't let you in to visit the person or anything either, which is quite right. No, it's very difficult, very difficult. And it's not just trans people. I mean, you know, any butch lesbian who turns up in a care home with a suitcase full of men's clothes is going to have the same sort of issues. That's taken us rather a long way from right.
Parallel. But yeah, there are lots of parallels there.
There are.
I do lots of work with consent just as a value, and kind of looking at how consent falls into different situations. Not just kind of, you know, we think of it as something to do with sex, but it's actually really important everywhere in our lives. And kind of you know, what happens to consent in care homes and in that sector is such a kind of, it's not like we don't know that there are some serious issues with how we treat people as they get towards the end of their lives. Like, we all know that. And I think there is definitely this kind of weird cultural silencing, actually,
there is,
we all participate in, which is...
Yeah, there is some good research and writing on this topic if you're ever interested. I could point you out.
Oh yeah, I would love that personally, and then maybe we could also send it to Lesley and almost do like a little, maybe if people are interested who are watching this, some links and some reading. That would be really lovely.
Yeah.
I'm interested, because we're all people who work with stories in one way or another, just to throw out whether we think there is a story we're being told about COVID from kind of the powers that be and the government, and I hate saying the word of the media because it, I feel like it's increasingly meaningless and it doesn't mean what we think it means, but the media. Is there like an official story? And if so, is it true? And as people who do certain kinds of disruptive storytelling, what do we need to be disrupting?
Well,
I've patented 6 questions in one.
I feel like, honestly, I have really struggled to understand and like keep track of and follow one coherent story, because I think, like, especially if we're talking about coming from the government, I think it has been in their interest to confuse the hell out of us. So I don't think that they have been presenting us with a coherent narrative of COVID. I think that it's changing from one day to the next in such a way that completely, like, just is completely, like, throwing us each time, because, you know, I've thought that I've had a grip on what's going on, and like what, you know, what we're being told and what's happening in terms of people coming back to work, or like what the rules are now, or like what like whatever. I'm not, I have no idea at any given point. Like, I think that it has been so confusing, and it's been deliberately confusing, and then, like, we're being made out to be either, like, somehow disobedient or stupid or too scared, or like every which way. I think, you know, we're being told we're doing it wrong, and I think that it's so confusing to so many people. And I think that a huge thing of the narrative that I've been noticing is that, once again, disabled people are completely left out, completely forgotten, and expected to just, you know, lie down and be quiet and disappear. And I think, you know, my mother's disabled and is, like, very heavy into disability rights activism and does a lot of work in that. And I'm so aware of, you know, her and her friends and how they've been saying, like, it's exactly like, this is just, we're just being told, okay, well, if you can't access things, if you can't, like, if you can't go outside, if you're shielding, like, well, yeah, too bad, just be quiet. Like, and oh yeah, it's great, everyone else can go back to work now, everyone else can go back to university. Like, I know there's people who have, like, yeah, all of these ways in which, like, the world has sort of become, like, momentarily accessible through things like Zoom or through like whatever. Like, as soon as everybody else can go back to normality, like, disabled people are being considered to be, like, now too much trouble to, like, continue to do the things that have made everything accessible. Like, if you are shielding and nobody else in your class is shielding, then you're not in class anymore. Like, you just, no, screw it. Like, if you are, like, whatever, like, all of these ways in which I think that the world had this, like, I was so excited at a point, because I thought, look at all of these ways in which it turns out we actually can be completely inclusive and accessible. Look at all of these, isn't that great? And now it's all, like, I can just see it slipping away and just disappearing, and the people who benefited the most from it being told, no, we don't want to do that anymore, like, we're going back to normal. And it's just bleak. It's just so bleak.
Yeah. I've actually, I was having a conversation with someone recently about who's a kind of involved in, like, disability arts practice, who's kind of, like, really good at picking fantastic solutions out of thin air. And one of the things I'm kind of writing into my personal, like, my freelance policies at the moment, is just charging more for work that is in some way inaccessible, like charging companies more money. And I wonder if there's, like, a collective action thing there that we can do, like, actually just being like, you don't get my skills if you're not going to make this accessible. You know, if you don't make this accessible, then I'm going to charge you more, and then I'm going to put those resources into doing that. Because I think, otherwise it just doesn't, there is such a rush back to normal, as if that was working for everyone. And it really wasn't. Um, I'm conscious of gone to lots of really lovely, useful places, but I think we'll start to wind down. I wanted to ask a question, kind of in the hope that this gets seen by us in the future and by other people in the future. So kind of my last question is, what do we need to keep for the future that we've learned during this time, or that we've discovered, not just for the next year or the next 2 years, but for the next generation of young queer and LGBT people who are coming up now? What would we like to, I guess, pass on and pass down? Daniel, you haven't spoken in a little while.
I think what you can take. Oh, I don't know. I mean, I would, going back to the former question just for a second, I would completely agree with Subira about all the confusion tactics and stuff, and the effect of it on so many different marginalised communities. And I think that's something that you need to take from it and look throughout history, that whenever there is a big issue, it is the marginalised. If you have not got the hegemonic, if you've not got the dominant voice, you are the one that gets. And I think we need to keep questioning that and looking at that and reevaluating that. I think one minor is a very small thing, but if you look at like the rainbow flag, and the like misappropriation of that, basically, and as soon as you complain about that, you hate the NHS, which isn't what I'm saying. And I do think that the more updated version is far more inclusive, but that flag has existed as a sense of community for worldwide since like the 1979, I think, but I might be talking out of turn there with the exact date. But and then within months, that's being sold as the key workers flag, the NHS flag is being, and what I think you need to take from this experience, which is, I think you wanted it to end on a positive look up to the future, but I think what you need to look at is
necessarily.
But I think what we need to look at is how quickly things can be taken away from you when there is, when things change. Like, I feel, as I say, it took minutes, took weeks or whatever to take a symbol of community for you and turn that into something else. And it didn't even come from a bad place. It originally came from, it was coming towards Pride, and they put the rainbow flag behind the NHS on NHS badges to show inclusion when you went into hospitals. So, and that has then been taken and turned into, this is ours. So it wasn't even meant, it was meant to be inclusive. But I think that's the thing, is I think you need to keep questioning, how these things are happening. I think it's been brilliant that during this time, there has been like Black Lives Matter, I think is a brilliant example of protest and not allowing something like this to change, to overshadow other examples, other ongoing things. Basically, I think you need to keep them coexisting, because I think basically, as I said really early on, I think the problem with big things like this is often they erase our history, or they erase different voices. Basically, they, because the focus becomes on just one thing. Like if you look again at the appointment of Tony Abbott to the government, in the interview Matt Hancock did, he goes that he's not great in interviews. He stumbles almost as much as I do, but he said. I think it's Kay Burley, she said he's homophobic and misogynistic, and Matt Hancock went, and he's also an expert on trade. And I think that's actually a really good example of when the focus shifts. Again, it's if you do not fit that hegemonic voice, if you don't fit the most pressing concern, you are lesser. And I think that's what we need to keep looking at and questioning, and look at this situation and think, what happened to our voices, what happened to our, our communities, all different fragments and marginalizations of them, and think, how can you address that basically when something happens, we aren't the first on the chopping board, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's really important, and I wasn't trying to steer us necessarily towards positivity in a artificial way.
Okay.
I think actually, there's something in there about the fact that this none of the protections and none of the acceptance that we have can be taken for granted.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's also important to remember that none of it came easy. It took a lot of work, and it is going to continue to take a lot of work. So that's important for us to remember. Does anyone want to, Jane, do you want to say anything about the future, what we should be doing, what we should be leaving behind?
I've found this the hardest of your questions to think about. And I guess it's a bit cynical of me, but I don't think that we do take lessons from previous generations. I don't think we're at all good at that. We are ignoring of our history and condemned to repeat it, as they say. So I would like to think that there are lessons that people in the future could learn from how we've done in the past. And it was interesting, wasn't it, at the beginning of lockdown, when people kept referring back to how Britain coped in the war, as if that was their only kind of cultural reference point. And if there was a motto I had to hand on, I guess I've always been with E.M. Forster when he writes, when George writes on the mirror, only connect. Because I think the lesson for me has been the LGBTQ community is good at looking after each other. Networking, in the days when we were below the radar, we did it underground, and we network amazingly, and we look after our own. And I think what we've had to learn in lockdown has been how to do that in different ways. It's been very hard. It's been very hard not to be able to hug people, not to be able to go and see them. And it's been about finding other ways of supporting and loving people, and keeping our queer family, together and hopeful. And it's been very difficult. But I think that would be my lesson for the future. That there are always ways of doing it, but we have to find them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and we do. I think that is something that is a constant. I guess I'm very lucky to have family in lots of different places around the world, and you sort of do that thing of going, where are the queer people in this country, like, and you see it everywhere. We do look after each other, and I think we cannot lose that. Subira, did you have thoughts on this in this question?
I guess in the thoughts in the same world as what you've both been saying. But yeah, I mean, I guess I have. Yeah, I've been thinking about how we've been referring back to other moments, and also how, like, maybe something that I've noticed a lot of people doing has been to be reflecting back on their own stuff. And like, it's been one of those things, I've been like, so many old things have been coming up for lots of people, and people have been coming to me with like, hey, can we talk over this thing that happened like 5-10 years ago? Like this, like loads of people are kind of have been, I think somehow a stillness has offered people the opportunity to do a lot of self-reflection and kind of take stock. And I think that's been really valuable in some way, in lots of ways. And I think in taking stock for myself, a lot that's come up, a lot that I've been thinking about has been about, what does community look like? How do we make sure we're still connecting with each other in meaningful ways? how do we, like, I don't know, I've been trying to do new things because I'm very aware that, like, of how, I think something that this whole thing has highlighted is how fragile everything is. And so, okay, like, I usually rely on, like, WhatsApp or Facebook or whatever. Like, can I just start sending friends posts? Like, can I start doing, like, finding other ways to connect with people? And I think that, yeah, God, the quiz. I've missed the quiz. But, like, you know, our community of really, really come through, and we know how to go to ground, I think. You know, like you sort of said, a lot of us know how to hide away and be not noticed. A lot of us know how to wait. Like, a lot of us have waited for a really long time before we could ever, like, come out or articulate ourselves in ways that we didn't even have the language for, or, like, whatever. I think that we know how to wait things out. So yeah, but we know how to stay connected whilst doing that. And I think that's kind of the most, that's the biggest thing, is that, like, that I hope that we can learn and continue to learn. And especially, like, with things like Black Lives Matter, like, I've had so much anger and nowhere to put it. But seeing that other people can and have been going outside and putting that anger somewhere and making a huge amount of noise, I think it's been, like, incredible. And I think that the way that Black Lives Matter has played out and has had, like, the way that people have responded has been largely also, I think it's been impacted by the way that people are feeling in lockdown and the isolation, and, like, being able to take stock and look back and go, wow, like, the world has not been right for a really, really, really long time. For a really long time. So I have no idea where my thread is going. I kind of lost it. But I guess that, yeah, I think that the ways that we are connecting with each other and showing anger and showing strength, like, I'm hoping these have all felt like positives, even though in many ways they've been completely tragic. Like, I'm also seeing the ways that we connect with each other through tragedy, and that's a form of huge strength.
Yeah, I agree. The thing that really stood out to me in what you said was that we know how to go to ground, and there is something that sort of quite early in lockdown. A friend of mine was saying that she was talking to lots of people, and they were sort of divided into two camps. They were either everything was already hard and this is completely overwhelming, or there were people who are going, I've done a version of this before and I feel incredibly well resourced. And I said to her, you know, yes, both of those things feel like I'm swapping between them on a daily basis. But it's true. We are simultaneously incredibly vulnerable as a community, and also incredibly resilient and well-resourced. And I think just remembering both of those things is something that I hope I can keep doing, and I hope other people can keep doing. That felt like an ending, I guess. And we've been talking for a while, so yeah, I wanted to thank you all for bringing everything that you brought, and also to thank Lesley and everyone at New Writing South, and everyone at Brighton University and Sussex as well, for giving us the opportunity to create this little moment, and hopefully it's something that's useful for other people and which lands really beautifully. Thank you all so much. It's been a genuine pleasure.
Thank you very much.